Thank you. Hello.
So when you first meet Stephen Levitt,
Yeah.
you just sit there and say, yeah, we're going to create this thing. It's going to last 20 years, no problem, right?
That was the plan.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the plan.
Okay.
No, it was very unlikely. First of all, thank you, Bud. Nice to see everybody. Yeah, it was very unlikely. I feel like when you make stuff for a living or even just for fun, the correlation between how you think something might turn out and how it does turn out is very mysterious. And so, now I've been making stuff for a long time, and I realized that, for me at least, the formula, if there is one, is just to follow ideas that you think that are fascinating to you. And then, there's all this, if you think about the 10,000-hour rule, which Malcolm Gladwell popularized, which is based on research by Anders Ericsson and these other guys. I think what that really is about is that it's hard to get great at something unless you do it and do it and do it and do it and do it a lot. And it's hard to do it and do it and do it and do it a lot unless you love it. And so, there's this whole idea of follow your passion, which I think is a version of it, but I think it leads people astray, because often the passion is not a thing that's necessarily productive. It might be just, I might want to just go skateboarding and do drugs or something, might be my passion. But yeah, I feel like I'm just starting at, my relatively advanced stage. I'm just starting to figure out how to really make stuff that I love and care about. And I think that gives it a chance to be good. There's no guarantee. And then you might even make something that's really good, and that gives you no guarantee that it will succeed either. But at least you'll go to sleep at night feeling like, you know what? I did a good day's work, and I like that. That's all I'm after.
Do you think you were already inclined before you met him for that New York Times article in 2003?
Sounds right.
Yeah. The hidden side of everything. Do you think the way you looked at things, even prior to meeting him, you were not susceptible to what he was going to say, but you kind of thought along those lines to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I loved about Levitt, and I still love him. In fact, he was in town last night. We got to hang out for the first time, just hanging out with my wife and doing some fun stuff for a couple of years. Because we had we weren't friends in the beginning. I was a writer, journalist. I was working on a book about what we now call behavioral economics, or the psychology of money. And I was asked to write a piece about Levitt because he just won an award. And I turned down the assignment several times, which was stupid. Then finally I was going to be in Chicago anyway, where he is. And I decided to read a bunch of his papers. And what I was immediately struck by was that he was doing, as an economist, something that felt at least very similar to what I'd always done as a writer, which is I never really wanted to be a beat writer. I didn't want to write the stories that everybody was already writing, but that was helped by the fact that my first writing job in New York was at New York Magazine, writing for the front of the book that was called Fast Track back then, which was a name that we hated even then, and now sounds even worse. But they were short profiles usually, 400 words, maybe 650, maybe 800 for some. And there was a premium on novelty, someone doing something interesting or new. There was a premium on interesting, and there was a premium on a certain soulfulness, I think. I've never been attracted, I'm attracted to people who accomplish things that are perhaps slightly less appreciated in the mainstream than all the other normal things, right? So, look, I admire titans of industry as much as the next person, maybe I don't know, maybe slightly more even. I know how hard that is to be. But I'd always liked, I remember one day wandering around on the Upper East Side, and I stumbled across 3 stories in one day that would turn out to be future short pieces in New York Magazine for me. One of them was about, I was at the Metropolitan Museum, and you go in the Temple of Dender, and there's a fountain there, and there's so many coins in the fountain because people throw them, they wish. And I was just wondering, like, what happens to the coins? Who does this? And that led me to the guy who was essentially a janitor who once a week would do it. Then that led to a process about how they're gathered up and then they're sorted and cleaned. And then, this was a while ago, they would actually take them to a bank. And the problem was that a lot of them were kind of weird coins, a lot of them were foreign coins and so on. So I think it was not a very cost-effective operation for the Metropolitan Museum. But I loved learning about the world through writing. And so when I found Levitt doing this research, it was so, the great thing is it was very quirky and very interesting, which is good. It often felt important, which is also good. But better than all of that, it was empirical. So as a writer, you gather as much evidence or at least anecdotes as you can, but I'm not a big fan of journalism that is like, this person did this thing, and then another person did this thing, and then another person did this thing, and now we can assert that this is the norm. That's crazy. That's just bad probabilistic thinking. And so with Levitt, he had done a lot of research that was based on empirical analysis, data analysis, which was great for me, great material to collaborate with, but also I learned a lot from Steve Levitt. He's been an amazing economics teacher for me for 20 years.
And so were you in from the get-go? I mean, I think you were supposed to just be there for an hour or two, and then you ended up spending a couple of days there.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, I have a barnacle nature to myself.
But no, was there something like, even in those first few hours as you're listening to him or interviewing him, of like, oh, this is,
yes,
we got something
100%. I remember, okay, you got to keep in mind, I'm writing probably 5,000 word piece for the Times Magazine on an applied microeconomist at the University of Chicago whose body of work includes things about collusion among sumo wrestlers and the true incentives of real estate agents. So it's not about the economy, what most people think.
What you're saying is it's just another article about a guy and collusion among sumo wrestlers.
Just another one of those articles.
Dime a dozen. Yeah.
And I remember, so yes, it is true that I told Levitt, I'm coming to Chicago and I'd like to sit down and talk for a while. And he likes to tell the story that I said I only need an hour or two. I'm sure I probably lied a little bit better than that, but I did end up staying for 3 days. But I remember after the first day, I remember going back to my hotel in Hyde Park in Chicago and calling my wife and saying, this is just going to be so much fun. And I don't think anybody's going to care about this article that I write. He's an economist studying this strange stuff. But I love how his mind works. I love talking to him. I love learning from him. And so, yeah, I was extremely excited. Then I wrote the article. People liked the article. Book publishers went to Levitt and me individually, separately, wanting books. Levitt would tell them, like, I don't want to write a book. I'm not a writer. I would say, I don't want to write a book about an economist I just wrote a piece about. And then Levitt, we weren't buddies. You know, I was a journalist. He was the subject. But he called me after, and he said, all these publishers are calling to write a book. What should I do? I said, well, do you want to write a book? He said, no, I don't want to write a book. I said, well, you figure out what to do. Maybe you have a ghostwriter or something like that. He said, well, how do I do that? I said, you need an agent. He said, do you know any agents? I said, I do. I happen to know an agent, and I think she's the best agent in the world, Suzanne Gluck, who was my agent. And I said, why don't you talk to her? And then Suzanne, who's a dear friend and a great, great literary agent, she came up with the idea, why don't you two guys think about collaborating, which, as obvious as it seems in retrospect, never would have crossed my mind. And so we got together. We thought, do we like each other? Would it be fun to work together? And we were just like a pair of giggly boys in the back of it. We just had so much fun from the outset once we were on this joint idea. And then, then we wrote the book. We had fun writing the book, and it's been kind of good stuff ever since, yeah.
So there's a famous story for fans or admirers of the great musician James Taylor, that he's in England, he has a cassette tape, or maybe it's a reel-to-reel in 67, 68, and by circumstance and Peter Asher, he ends up being signed by Apple as the first musician to be signed by Apple, and all of a sudden he's in a studio, and Paul McCartney is there, and George Harrison is there, and he describes it as being there in the studio. I could see how the window was opening onto the rest of my life. And so I'm curious, as you're working on the first book, before the reaction starts to come in, do you have any sense of, I've been successful before? I mean, you're working for the New York Times. You had books, beautiful books that had been published, which were not exactly chopped liver.
I like chopped liver.
Yeah, me too. Which I never understood that expression.
I'm with you, Bud.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
But was there any sense of, oh, this might be something that's going to really take off?
No. I mean, short answer, no. The publisher paid quite a bit for it. You know, I'd published 2 books. I had 2 more under contract, so I kind of was in that game, and I knew what was a good price. Like, publishers, it's like anything. They set a price in their minds, or there's an auction or whatever among different publishers, and that's some degree of an indication of what they think will be the market response.
Right.
And so this book, we got a pretty good advance. We were surprised it was as high as it was. Levitt's father, when he first heard about it, he said, "Oh, you guys, you got to give the money back right away." He said, "You're going to write a book about the stuff that Steve studies, the sumo wrestlers and so on?"
Under the heading of predictions that kind of went awry.
That is the case. But no, I think the publisher probably felt like they'd made a mistake. I know that when we settled on the name, we loved the name Freakonomics. Took us a while. It was Steve Levitt's sister, Linda Gines, unfortunately the late Linda Gines, who came up with that. We loved it. It was so stupid that it was great, we thought, and the publisher hated it. And so they said, no. And then...
were there any other potential names that almost made the cut?
There were hundreds.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be totally honest if I didn't say that the names that we fed them between coming up with Freakonomics and publishing, the names we fed them were slightly intentionally bad. Because we really thought Freakonomics was a good name. And then at the 11th hour, they kind of came around, and I think they were happy about it. Yeah, it's hard to say how much a name... We have a chapter in the book about baby names, and the conclusion there empirically is that the name you give your kid really doesn't matter in terms of life outcome, like job applications. There's a lot of interesting research that seems to suggest it does. Right. But the data suggests it actually doesn't. So I don't know how much the name of Freakonomics matters, but I think it was a pretty good name, and it's, turned into it's recognizable, it's a little bit weird, and it's repeatable, so that even now, 20 years later, doing stuff like Freakonomics Radio, it's a help to have a name like that.
Oh, it's beyond recognizable. It became part of the vocabulary amongst people who are interested in this type of thing and beyond. So I'm curious, once the book is out and doing well, is there a first moment where people are actually using the phrase Freakonomics?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was an overwhelming experience to have a hit of this magnitude. It's just like, I'd been a writer for a while by then. Like I said, I'd written 2 books. I had 2 more in the works. And all my we had a phrase among us writers, you work on a book for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It goes into the publisher, they kick it back, there are drafts, you finally get to galleys that are sent out to reviewers and so on, and then you're waiting for the book and the real reviews and stuff, and we call that period the lull before the lull, because the fear, I mean, how many, there's 250,000 books published in the US every year. The vast majority will get read by probably an average of 5 people, which are mostly family members. It's really, really unlikely and hard. And so, the expectations were, you're excited. We worked really hard to prepare the way. Right. You try to take a piece of the book and make a good excerpt that will make a good magazine piece. You have to defend your case, and we thought it was a good book. But then when it came out, in the beginning it took a little while, but we got a couple really good reviews early, and then that just kind of energized the publisher, it energized us, and then it just really, it was just like a runaway train for the first couple years. And Levitt and I, we would be on the phone, 3, 4, 5 times a day. We also did a lot together. We were touring a lot, would go on TV and stuff. Like, as a writer, to get on TV to talk about a book seemed like an impossible dream. And now we're getting asked, like, I was under contract with ABC to do, I don't know, like GMA, maybe twice a month or something, sitting there with Diane Sawyer talking about my book as a routine thing.
Right.
So it was very disorienting, honestly. And I also, I don't really like being out front. I like, I've had bouts in my life where I had been a performer and I decided I didn't really like it. So I thought, okay, I was a musician, I had a career, I stopped, and then I was gonna, I'd always been a writer. I thought I'm gonna be a writer. Right. And the beauty part is that you can just do that in your pajamas, alone. And then the irony of having a book that put me back out front, it was all like I was extremely grateful, right. But it was jarring, and so it took a lot of adjustment. And I'm still kind of adjusting. It's a little bit of I wouldn't say a conflict, because I am cognizant of and grateful for the fact that doing things in public, whether it's media or live events like this, like it's a totally essential part of what I do. Right. And I learn a lot by doing these things, but I also, like, my favorite days are the days when there's nothing on my calendar except sit in my office and edit, like now for Freakonomics Radio, right. Edit or write a script. That's where I feel most comfortable.
So what I'm hearing is that GMA would not allow you to come in pajamas.
That is true. In fact, once the car that they sent for me at 7:20 had been used earlier to ferry Sam Champion, who I guess was the weather guy, and he'd left this beautiful windbreaker in there, and I wore it, and I felt like GMA royalty. And then I decided that actually having cool clothes on TV was a pretty good idea.
During a reread of the book recently, the issues and the chapter titles, compelling then, compelling now, among those to me that stand out are, why do drug dealers live with their moms?
I still like that one, yeah. Oh, you want to answer that question?
Well, I don't even know whether there's a question there, but the notion of, just like that moment of, wait, this is compelling, this is interesting, this is deserving of exploration.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good example of what I was talking about earlier, which is, as a writer, every writer, look, I would argue all of us are writers all the time, right? But if you do it with a certain intention, you're trying to write books or scripts or do TV or radio or podcasts, there is a way in which you're trying to be attracted to stories that are compelling on a few levels. Let's put it that way, okay? At least that's been my experience. But just to write a profile or just to write a TikTok of some news event or whatever, that's challenging and compelling and good and all that. But what Levitt introduced me to was this whole world of, he was a data partner. So this drug dealing chapter emerged from a paper that he'd written with a collaborator, a guy named Sudhir Venkatesh, who's a sociologist now, I think still at Columbia. Sudhir, when he was a graduate student at Chicago, which I believe the University of Chicago kind of invented the field of sociology. There may be a sociologist here who knows better than I. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. And so Sudhir was a young graduate student working with, I want to say, William Julius Wilson. Do you know if that's correct as well? He was at UChicago for a long time? No?
Wait, did you all know there was going to be a test?
So Sudhir Venkatesh, young Indian-American kid, not black, not white, is sent around for his field work to go to the projects in Chicago, which are probably 99% black, and interview them with a survey. And the first question on the survey, if I recall correctly, I mean, this is how academic sociologists work. The first question was, how does it feel to be poor and black? A, very good. B, somewhat good. C, And so Sudhir, this kid, this Indian American kid, so like I said, if he were white, it would have been perceived one way. If he were black, it might have been perceived another. He was coming in just trying to be a sociology graduate student. And the events that unfolded there were, he was ultimately sort of embedded in what turned out to be a crack selling gang after he was briefly kidnapped. So that was a little bit scary. But then the guy that ran this gang was a really interesting, smart guy, and he allowed Sudhir to come into that world, and Sudhir got a lot of quantitative and qualitative information. So when he and, I don't mean drugs, I just mean information. And so when he and Levitt then wrote a paper together about the economics of a crack-selling gang, which no one had ever really done before, right. It was incredibly compelling and believable because there was data there that came from the inside. So the reason we called the title that, Why Do Drug Dealers Still Live With Their Moms, was A, we could tell a story about the kind of organizational structure of the gang, the economics of the gang, and it was fascinating, their interaction with law enforcement, which is much more nuanced than you might think. But my favorite part of it was there's a conventional wisdom out there that said the way to get rich is to be a drug dealer. And it's glorified in movies, it's written about in the mainstream media all the time. And it turns out that the median drug dealer is making close to no money. So it turns out that it's a kind of tournament model that economists would call it. At the very top, you're doing pretty well, although taking a great amount of risk. And everybody else down the chain, their lives actually would have been much better just working a fast food job, right, where they're making about as much money and not getting shot at and not being at risk of arrest. So what I liked about that chapter and that story was, and it's something we did in Freakonomics a lot, which was take a conventional wisdom of some sort and say, we understand why people think this is the way it is, and we're not trying to be those people that say, well, actually, everything you think is wrong. Right. You have to be, we're not doing that. But when you have the data to actually tell a story that shows that the conventional wisdom is wrong, that to me is a really satisfying use of journalism.
One of the other really compelling chapters in the first book is Where Have All the Criminals Gone?
Ah, yeah, that was a good one.
And if you've read the book, you know. If you haven't read it, I recommend it highly. The notion that, and everybody is trying to figure out why crime actually went down in the early 90s. Certainly that's a story that goes on in New York with the Dinkins people claiming credit and the Giuliani people claiming credit, and then it's going down nationally and everybody's claiming credit for a whole variety of reasons. But no one is saying anything about the fact that it is connected to abortion. And so I'm curious, as the two of you are looking at the data and writing the book and writing the chapter, is there any notion of, all right, this is kind of blow people's minds, and we're dealing with abortion here. The last time that topic was talked about without passion was never. So was there any, not trepidation, but something along those lines of, do we really want to go into this?
Right. So that paper that Levitt wrote with a guy named John Donahue, a legal scholar, I think is now at Stanford. So that story, the abortion, so the theory is quite simple, really, which is that the legalization of abortion via Roe v. Wade in 1973 led to, obviously, the availability of legal abortion across the country. Before then, there had been, I think, 5 states where abortion had been legalized a few years before, which turned out to be a key point in the data, the kind of the collage of data that made this argument. And the argument is very simply that what does abortion do for a woman is it either changes the timing or the totality of having a child at that moment, at least, right? And if you think about anybody's choice to ever do anything, timing matters quite a bit. But if you're thinking about having a child, if the timing or circumstances are not good, and you think it's not you're either not in the right place, not in the right relationship, whatever, to have a child, well, what would that lead to if you do have a child? It would lead to the word that we use and that's used in sociology is unwanted, children who are unwanted, which is not my favorite word in the world. But it turns out that if you just look across the social science literature for decades and decades, children who are born into a home or family where they are, let's say, less wanted than in other circumstances, their prospects of having a wonderful life are greatly diminished. There are a lot of things working against you. It might be poverty, it might be having one parent, it could be any number of things. And so the argument was simply that when more women had availability of abortion when needed, desired, that there were fewer children being born into circumstances that were more likely to produce criminal behavior and other behavior like that. Now, it's a really hard thing to prove, because in the real world, the data, you can't just turn on a switch. But in this case, what Levitt and John Donahue had done before I met Levitt, this is actually what got me to Levitt in the first place, is he had written this paper that had gotten quite a bit of press, as you could imagine. And I knew about that coming into Levitt, to working with Levitt. But they did assemble a collage of evidence that dealt with timing. So in those 5 states that I mentioned that had legalization of abortion earlier, when you can measure, when you have a kind of instrumental variable that you can put into this equation, you can see that in those states, you can look, and when they had the legalization of abortion earlier, did their crime begin to fall at a different pace or at a different time? And the answer was yes. So they put together a massive collage of evidence that is very, very, very compelling. They made a coding error in their original paper, so some scholars attacked the theory, but then they went back and they reran it. They actually reran it again another 15 years later, and they published a paper that showed that the evidence was even stronger in that direction. So this was a compelling and, as you noted, controversial argument to make. When I wrote the magazine piece about Levitt, I included this argument, this discussion. But I was so, as a journalist, you hate to repeat yourself. So when we decided we were going to write a book, I actually said, I don't know, the abortion argument, as interesting as it is, Levitt, it feels kind of played out. Maybe we should just not include it, which was really stupid because many people don't read the New York Times magazine. Most people don't read the academic paper that Levitt and Donahue wrote. Yeah. So yes, we wrote it in the book, but in a book, what's great about a book is you have the time to frame the argument, put it in context, show the homework, and make an argument that shows that even if you are as anti-crime as it gets, that to embrace abortion as a crime-fighting tool is idiotic because the intensity of the return is very low. So if you really care about crime, what you should really care about is providing more opportunities for more families to have children being raised in loving, wanted environments. And in the occasions when their parents alone can't provide that, maybe you want to think about strengthening the safety net to children and families. It astonishes me that we're easily the only rich country in the world that spends a relatively tiny amount of money on families and children, which I think is one of the many things on anybody's wish list when you think about how can we make policy that actually improves a lot of lives with a lot of leverage at the front end of, by the time if you're trying to fix people in high school, you're 15 years too late.
Right. Well, the article was written in 2003, the Times article. Yeah. The book came out in 2000. Good thing we put that issue to bed. Yeah, it's a good thing we figured that out. The radio show is terrific, and the podcast is terrific. There are a recent series on the business of theater that I recommend highly, really brilliant, and the NCAA and the whole notion of top college athletes now being paid, and that's a subject that's been discussed here's how long it's been discussed. In the great Marx Brothers movie Horse Feathers, which I think is 1929, Groucho, who's the president of the college, says, we need a college that the football team can be proud of. And it's that's almost 100 years ago. But another great series on Freakonomics Radio about the NCAA. I'm curious, the subtitle, A Hidden Side to Everything. Yeah. Are there times when you're not working, when you're out with family or friends, okay? And they have to...
I like that you assume I have friends.
Oh, there you go. And they have to say to you, look, Stephen, there's no hidden side to what we're doing right now. It's just a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's two loaves of bread.
All right, maybe peanut butter and jelly, but let's talk for just a minute about the Uncrustable lawsuit, which I'm very interested in, okay? Because Trader Joe's, here's my theory. No.
You guys, do you have about a week and a half? Because I think we've opened something. Go ahead, a theory.
I have a little bit of inside information on this that I'm not allowed to reveal, but I do have a little bit. My theory is that Trader Joe's, and there's a whole history of white label manufacturing and kind of copying, brand products and so on. I think that this lawsuit is the best thing that could have happened to Trader Joe's, right? So whoever makes Uncrustable Smuckers, maybe, I don't know, came after Trader Joe's when they came out with their version, which is very, very, very similar. And I think that it's a fantastic, now the entire world who reads the business pages at least that sees that Smuckers or whoever has sued Trader Joe's for brand infringement or whatever it is, now the entire world knows that Trader Joe's has that sandwich.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a lot cheaper than it is in the Smuckers brand. So I actually think that was pretty good. So yes, there's a hidden side. But in terms of your actual question, like, am I annoying and obnoxious? Yes.
Annoying and obnoxious can be taken in so many ways,
I know who I am by this point. I mean, I don't dislike myself. I like myself.
Yeah.
But you get older, you become self-aware. I think my big thing is I'm the youngest in a big family. I'm the youngest of 8. And when you're in a big family like that, you don't really get a lot of airtime or stage time or anything. And so I didn't get to really everybody's going, talking about school and sports and this and that. And I was just kind of observing, which by the way, I like, I'm a trier and I'm a noticer. That's what I am as a writer. I try hard and I notice. And, but ever since I've been out of the family, I just can't shut up because I finally get to talk. At the dinner table, I could never get anything in.
So you mentioned your family, and we're going to get to your questions in just a couple of minutes. We'll have about 15, 20 minutes for questions from the audience. I mentioned in the intro, if you've not read Turbulent Souls, the Freakonomics books are terrific. Turbulent Souls is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read.
Thank you.
And it's about your journey.
A Catholic son's return to his Jewish family, I think was the subhead.
That's right.
Subtitle. And the first time I was ever at the 92nd Street Y, I was giving a talk for that book, probably on the stage. And it was, it was a book about my family. And I haven't gone back to read that book, but I was so proud of writing that book because that was a tribute to my family, to my parents. It was a learning experience. It was a way for me to, I never wanted to write about myself. That was the one conflict.
Right.
I didn't want to be a memoir writer. I was trained as a writer. And in my family, you didn't talk about yourself. You didn't brag. As a writer, you didn't use the word I and me. You just didn't. I was trained as a journalist. I really liked that. And then for a weird set of circumstances having to do with the New York Times Magazine, like you mentioned, I wrote a piece about my mom and dad, but it kind of turned into a piece about me as well. So that was my one ambivalence about it. But going deep on your own family there was conflict in the story, but there was also a very loving.
Absolutely loving.
And it was just everything I've written since then. I've never published anything I didn't really try hard at and that I didn't care about. And I've put more books in drawers and thrown them away than I've published books. I've thrown away a lot of writing. I feel like writing is a little bit like prayer and maybe sex and maybe a few other things that if you do it without full intention, then what are we doing here? And so, but that book to me, Turbulent Souls, had the most of my intention in it. So I'm glad you brought it up. I'm proud of it.
Oh, it's a book to be proud of, and it's a beautiful book to read. And so I'm curious, the crux of that book, that your parents were born and raised Jewish in Brooklyn and then chose Catholicism after World War II. And
During.
Okay. And that you, as you grow older, start to become aware of a whole family that exists, extended family. The notion that family was kind of hidden, the hidden side of everything. I'm not trying to play armchair psychologist here, but is there any connection between writing that book and then being in a position where you could write these books for which you would become best known?
Excellent question, Budd Mishkin. Excellent question. I think that's totally valid. It's hard for me to say yes or no for sure.
Right.
But I will say the thrill to me of being a writer is very, very simple. It's finding out stuff.
Yeah.
So when I was a kid, I was very, very shy. I'm still shy. I can kind of pretend to not be shy once in a while. But I'm just a shy person. But I also wanted to know stuff. I wanted to know everything. I think most kids are just curiosity engines, and then school kind of can beat it out of you sometimes. And so from a very early age, because my dad was a newspaper man, we had a family newspaper when I was very young. I started the high school newspaper, and what I found was that writing, being a journalist, being a reporter, was a great racket because it allows you to ask anybody any question. And they often, sometimes you'll ask a question that will upset people or that they don't want to talk about something, but it's permission to exercise your curiosity. And I believe there's a lot of cynicism among writers, among journalists. There absolutely is. And so there are whole classes of people, politicians, industry leaders, who think that all journalists are just looking to expose the worst. And there are some journalists who are like that. My belief is that if you come to almost anybody in the world and you show them that you have true curiosity and you really want them to tell you how they do what they do or how this certain thing works, most people are going to answer it. And then I just write it down, then kind of think about it and present it in a certain way. But the writing is the easy job. It's the people who do the stuff in the world, often which is very, very underappreciated. And I feel like writing, especially now with the state of journalism now, I'm not saying it's all bad. There's a lot of good journalism out there, but it's an extremely turbulent, chaotic time for journalism. If you look at the modern history of journalism, there's never been any period like this. I feel like it's just good for all of us to remind ourselves that this is a very basic tool that helps a society function. Right. Not just transparency in government, that's a big part of it, but also it's like people need to understand how the world works. And I think that is the basic rudimentary function of writing and journalism, but often underweighted now. And that's really, that's why I make a show every week. There's no scarcity of things to figure out.
So the notion of the hidden side of everything, when you first started on that in the book, and Levitt writing before that, the papers that he was writing, do you look at those, do you think that it is what it is in 2005 and in 2025? Or is that methodology for you and Levitt, and you doing the radio show, has it remained the same, or because of our times changing, it has to kind of change?
I think it's changed for a lot. Freakonomics Radio now is pretty different than it was when I started, which was 15 years ago, for 1,800 different reasons. Yes, the way that people assess and appreciate information is different. But also I'm different. I get bored. I get bored very, very easily. So someone who's listened to every episode of Freakonomics Radio in 15 years, we do get people all the time writing and say, I just started listening, 3 years ago, and I just finished, which I think is absurd. I wouldn't do that. But even people who do that, I don't think they think it has changed that much, because it's still me trying to tell stories with data. But for me, there have been 18 different formats, a whole bunch of different styles of doing the show and so on. And so I like to I like to try new things. But also when you have a show that's working and you have an audience, I want to keep doing it. I learned a phrase from a friend of mine, Angela Duckworth, who wrote a book called Grit. She's a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania. And she taught me, I asked her once about grit versus quit. Grit is this idea, people have kind of weird impressions of what grit really means, but her definition is something like passion and perseverance. I forget the rest of it. Anyway, I guess I'm not gritty enough to remember the whole phrase. But the idea was that, how do you demarcate when you should give up on something, right, quit, versus grit it out? How do you know what the value is in the thing that you're trying to grit it out? And the thing that she taught me that's very useful is this notion of substituting nuance for novelty, okay, which is just kind of a catchphrase, but I think the way it worked for me is that novelty is that desire to always do new. So I should I start a new show? Should I do something entirely different? Whatever. And the fact is, if you like doing something, you feel you're pretty decent at it, then no, you probably shouldn't quit, but you need to find a way to add nuance to it that's going to keep it moving. And I find that phrase for me, substituting nuance for novelty, is hugely valuable in anything, personal relationships, the work, and so on. That said, I'm in the middle of starting right now a brand new project, which is on the side. So I'm doing Freak Radio, but I'm starting a new project because I like new stuff, and I like taking challenges that are probably absurd and stupid and won't work out in the end, but you never know.
The track record is pretty good.
You don't know all the failures, though. That's the thing,
The public track record. But this is good that you were announcing that you have a TV project that you're working on, because one of the nights I did here, this is about 15 years ago, was with Ira Glass and the staff of This American Life, and they announced that night.
I love that show they made for like one season.
And they announced that night that it was closing. So we actually broke some news. So now I'm 1-1. I'm hitting 500. Some questions from the audience. So here we go. Can you talk about your writing process and how you turn abstract thoughts into concrete detail in writing tips for aspiring writers?
Yeah, I like that. So remind me of the aspiring tips if I forget. In terms of the process, so for Freak Radio, so here's the key thing. I don't have a job. Like, this is all I do. I wander around, I read a lot, I talk to people, I'm curious, and so I have a lot of ideas. Like having been a writer for a long time, it just becomes second nature that ideas are the coin of the realm. It's another reason I never really like taking on assignments. It's a reason I didn't take on that Levitt assignment originally. I never really liked to be said, go write this piece. I always wanted to come to it myself. I always wanted to bring my own natural curiosity to it. But you need to have a lot of ideas, and then you need to get good at throwing away the 95% of the ideas that are bad. You need to develop that internal kind of taste meter. A lot of it is really about good taste. Some people are born with great taste. Others can acquire some. Others will never acquire. But then when you have an idea that if you interrogate it over and over again and it stands up, it's interesting, it's important, it's maybe a little bit unusual, then I go looking for evidence. The evidence might be in the form of hard data, might be in the form of people I can interview who are practitioners in that field, who have a way of describing what they do that there's no way of knowing if you're not inside that. So the level of evidence for me has to be pretty high. And then we start to interview people. So for Freakonomics Radio, there's a team and there's a process. We have producers. Every episode has one producer attached and me, and then a couple editors that work in collaboration. And we come up with angles that we're going to attack this. We do a lot of research to find the best people to talk about this. Sometimes the best people who know the most aren't good talkers, which for radio matters a lot. For print, it doesn't matter. Then the producer will write like a 10 to 20 page prep for every person that I'm going to interview. I read that prep, I write my own questions. We interview, let's say, 4, 5, 6 people over usually about 1 to 2 hours each. Then we end up with a lot of tape, and then that gets turned into one draft script of maybe 25 pages, and we edit that, and then we write some narration, track that, listen to a rough mix, listen to a music mix, listen to a final mix, and we do that every week. Yeah. And if that sounds like stupidly labor intensive, it is, but that's the way I like to make stuff. Every week, like, not every episode is an A in our minds at all, but if it gets below B+, we get rid of it. And it feels really good at the end of the week to publish that thing. And that's the process. So like, I'm not gonna lie, it's like stressful and hard and time consuming. And I'm like I said, I'm a trier. I think I'm decently smart. I think my curiosity brings me to things in ways that are often valuable, that are overlooked. But, trying, I think, makes up for a lot of inadequacy.
Well, but it's also, there's just no, like as a reporter, there's no excuse for lack of preparation. If you're going to interview someone, no excuse, unless they say, hey, it's, in 5 minutes you need to go talk to so-and-so.
But you never.
But there's
feel,
also.
But you never feel like you've. I never feel like I've prepared enough. Like I had a 3-hour taping today for this new TV show with a guy that I love, a guy named John Urschel, who's a former NFL player who is now a math professor at MIT, which is not common. But even more uncommon is he was getting his PhD at MIT while playing in the NFL. He's an extraordinary human and a lovely, lovely, lovely human. And I know his story. I've hung out with him a bit. I've interviewed him a couple times. But like, even then, I feel like, I always feel like you could do more, but the reality is you can't. You don't have unlimited time.
No.
So part of it is learning how to work
You have to
smart
edit.
in a way,
Right.
but it's, I don't know about you, every interview I walk into, I feel like, if I only had 12 more hours to prepare for this.
Well, yeah, there's that. There's also showing them that you're serious about the subject because you've done your homework, and then they take it more seriously without going over that intangible line where it makes it weird.
Absolutely.
Like, I know every Tuesday you've got granola, not with bananas, and then on Wednesday you have the banana, and then all of a sudden you start to get into an area that's like, you've done a little bit too much research. So, a couple more questions. What is the biggest thing you've changed your mind about talking to so many interesting people?
Yeah, good question. That's a question I often ask people. A version of that question I'll ask. I'll ask a question sometimes. It's like, what's something that for a long time you believed to be true,
right,
and then you kind of figured out that you were wrong about it? And it's not necessarily a wrongness, but I do feel it's a real. I admire people with deep character. Reputation doesn't matter as much to me. If someone's famous, maybe they're great, but maybe they're not. But I feel if they've proven their character, then even if they're not famous, renowned, whatever, then for me, that's something really substantial to work with. And I think there are many components, obviously, of character. One is honesty. I think a big one is decency. I really feel like we're at the cusp of maybe a new human decency movement where we're really recognizing that all this shouting is really terrible for everyone. It's really not good for anyone. But one hallmark of what I think is good character is acknowledging that you have been wrong, that you can change your mind about things. So I think if I try to be a person of high character, which I try and fail all the time, as we all try and fail to do things we want, I think the biggest one for me was when I started hanging out with economists a lot, especially University of Chicago economists and like the Milton Friedman School of the world. Yeah. There were many things about which Milton Friedman and many of his colleagues were very brilliant and very correct on, but there was an overarching belief that the unfettered free markets within our capitalist democracy, whatever we want to call our republic situation, was really the way to go unquestioningly. And I think we now have enough evidence to know that that's not the case. And to me, like a really good example of that is, I don't know what share of economists, but I'm guessing it was probably between 70 and 90, really believed and argued that when the US began to offshore a lot of manufacturing, primarily to China, when China was admitted to the WTO, the whole idea was that we are going to abandon our position as a primary manufacturing nation, but the trade-off will be fantastic. All the manufactured goods we import and buy will be much, much cheaper and more affordable. And this was the key part, all the people who used to work in manufacturing and the people who would have in the future worked in manufacturing, they're going to be retrained into skill-appropriate sectors, and they're going to do even better. That last part didn't work. Right. It just didn't work. And so when I really began to see the early literature on that from guys like David Autor and Gordon Hanson, guys who ultimately won Nobel Prizes for showing, I think that's the case. I need to fact check myself on that. That was a real awakening to me, like, oh, the smartest people I know in the world, some of these economists are the smartest people I've ever encountered. And they followed the data, they followed intuition, they followed common sense, and they still ended up being mostly wrong. And so that made me not distrust economists, but it made me want to question the bigger premise, which is that this form of free market economics is, fireproof. It's not fireproof. And now there's a reckoning that has many, many dimensions and many ramifications, and we're going to have to realize what's real and fix it, because, if a theory, you can't cling to a theory if it's been so robustly disproven by data, and that's what I think we're looking at.
Yeah. We have time for a couple of more. We do have books, Freakonomics, that are pre-signed by Steven, that are for sale after the show. I've done a lot of events here at the Y through the years. This has a comment in parentheses that I've never seen before. Nothing profane, don't worry. The question is, and I'm not going to say the name of the person.
Say the name. Say the name. Did they write? They wrote their name on the card?
They did. Yeah. What music do you listen to /love? And then the person's name. Then in parentheses it says, "I love you."
Oh. I love you too.
Now,
sorry.
Is this for me or is this for? Oh, it's for Steven? Okay. Well, all right, that's fine. Music. Which plays a really integral role in the radio show.
Yeah, that's
true. It just really creates a mood, and it's great.
Yeah. I do like, so we have a composer, Luis Guerra, who's a LA composer who I love, very good friend, writes great music. I think the scoring of our show is really good. So what do I listen to these days? When I stopped playing, I played rock and roll music, and when I stopped, I kind of went cold turkey, and there's a period of 30 years of popular music that I don't know at all. I still don't really listen to current pop music.
You're not missing anything.
No, I'm not saying, I don't mean it as a value judgment at all. The last, let's say, 2 years, I've been listening to a lot of Mingus, a lot of Monk, a lot of Miles Davis. A lot of that era of jazz, which it's so good on so many levels for me. It's multi-dimensional, it's melodic, it's weird, it's exciting sonically, it's great sound. Those studios and the pressing of records back then, it's like such good stuff. I listen to a lot of classical, more and more Baroque lately. The last several years, I've been going to the Handel's Messiah at Lincoln Center.
Right.
There was a year during COVID when it was up at Riverside Church, which is an amazing place to hear it.
Right.
And I really fell in love with that piece of music. And we're preparing now a 3-part radio series on Messiah. And it's really about George Friedrich Handel as a musical entrepreneur in 18th century England, which was amazingly fun. We went over to London, Dublin, Chester, England, a bunch of places to report this out, because he was a guy, like, if you think about it, many forms of art, especially high art, they've always been subsidized, or there have been patrons of some kind. Handel really figured out a way to make it work. He was producing operas. He was funded by the king, who happened to be his buddy. They were, Germans, but a German Hanover king in England. And so he had this king's family funding his opera company, but you couldn't make any money doing opera. It was too expensive. All the costumes, all the sets, all the wigs. You had to fly over many of the singers from Italy. And so Handel wrote this piece, Messiah, for a variety of reasons. It's an interesting story, but it was an oratorio. It's kind of like a staged concert with only a few soloists and so on. And that turned out to be ultimately his big hit, but in doing so, he sort of invented a way to be a musical entrepreneur in the 18th century. Well, I love that story, because it's like, when you make anything now, you have to figure out, how are you going to get paid for it? It's not so easy. And the standard model for many years in this country is, you hope to get to the top of the pyramid and get then paid by a record label, a book publisher, whatever. Well, those companies are unbelievably, I won't say exploitive, but let's say extractive, right? They very, very, very rarely will make a deal that is pro-creator from the outset. They always take care of themselves first, and you're under their control. Once you take $1 from a record label or a book publisher, they have a lot to say with what you're going to make. And so for me, being I own my little company that makes Freakonomics Radio. I'm starting a TV show. We're privately funding this thing, and TV is expensive, as you know. But to me, the idea of thinking like Handel now to try to make the thing that I want to make the way I want to make it is thrilling. And the fact that I came to this reckoning by hearing Messiah at Lincoln Center, to me, this is why we live in New York. This is why we go see the stuff we do. This is why we hang out with the people that we hang out with. So yeah, that's what I do.
A couple of last things. You write near the end of Freakonomics, the first book in 2005, thinking sensibly about how people behave in the real world. I'm not sure that's a phrase that we would apply to what's going on without getting into any kind of politics about how we're behaving right now. So what do you see in terms of what you do and the hidden side of everything in terms of what's playing out in the country right now?
You know, the only answer I can offer is very small, individual, personal, which is, you know, do your work well. Everybody can be a light unto the nations in some way. It might be through your work. It might be in the way you treat people. I find that I'm really surprised these days at how often I see a lack of common decency among people. And look, I love New York as much as the next guy, and I know we have a reputation for being a little bit gruff and whatnot, but I think true New Yorkers are the kindest. We're just fast. We don't need to like dwell on it. You know?
It's the kind but not necessarily nice adage.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, I'll take your luggage from the A train and walk up the subway steps to the top of the subway station. I'll bring it up and no problem, but we're not gonna have a conversation once we get up there. Even if I've got nothing to do, I've got stuff to do. Now that I've answered my own question.
I think that's a much better answer than I was gonna give. The answer that I would give is this. You and I both love sports. You know much, much, much more about sports than I do, but there are many things to love about sports. When you grow up following sports, it's a kind of ethical ecosystem, you know? It's like sports is one of the few places where cheating to win is like cool, right? If you're not cheating, you're not trying. Cheating to throw the game, that's the worst because that betrays all the moral codes.
That's right.
But I really love athletes because it's such a hard thing to do well at a level. And the amount of discipline that it requires to succeed at that level is otherworldly to me. But the thing that I really like most is that there are a lot of athletes and a lot of teams that are successful where the leadership is by example. It's not about yelling at people. It's not about rah-rah. It's not about pep talk. It's about you show up every day and you do your job so thoroughly with such intensity, with such joy when you can, that you're doing, you know, we talk about writing as holding a mirror up to life. Shakespeare, you know, what Shakespeare did, showing us the way people lived back then before we had all the visual exposure that we do, that was a remarkable accomplishment. I feel similarly that every one of us, every day, has an opportunity to hold ourselves up as the mirror for the people that we're around. And I know that may not move political boundaries. I know that may not win a lot of votes, et cetera, but I think it's an incredibly powerful capacity that we all have. And I really think small. I think about trying to exercise that as intensely as I can. I happen to have a show that a lot of people listen to. I may have a little bit more leverage than average, but we all have a lot of leverage, and I think you should use every inch of it.
Yeah. Let's end on a fun note.
I thought that was pretty fun.
Yeah, that was fun. Kind, but not necessarily nice. All the people who have come tonight, whether they've expressed it or not, they don't want to leave without hearing the story of the night that Bruce Springsteen met Steven Dubner.
Oh, you think that's why they came?
I sense it, you know, between the lines. Yeah, Freakonomics is nice, and the other books and the radio show, but this is what we're...
Okay, so this
Since we were talking about music anyway.
We were, and you know, there's a guy named Warren Zanes that Budd interviewed recently, a really good interview on your show, When the Cheering Stops. Your show is called.
Before the cheering started, but that's close enough. That's fine. No, I appreciate the shout out. It's okay.
I got cheering right.
No, maybe I've had the wrong title all along. Since Freakonomics seems to work out pretty well, maybe I should change it.
Warren Zanes is a guy who is probably, 58, 60 years old. He used to be in a band called the Del Fuegos. It's a long story what Warren became, but he's a writer, really fine writer.
Terrific writer.
Really great writer. So anyway, Bud and I both know him, but Warren wrote a book a few years ago called Deliver Me From Nowhere, I believe was the title of the book, which is now a movie of that title, although they added the word Springsteen.
Yeah.
Because it's a kind of small studio. I'm not sure it's a studio, $55 million picture, which these days is small. There's a Springsteen movie out there now. You may have heard. It's about the writing of Nebraska, the acoustic record that Bruce made on a TIAC 4-track on cassette in his bedroom in Colts Neck, New Jersey. Right. Anyway, Warren Zanes at the time, this was back in the late 80s maybe, was playing in this band, the Del Fuegos. I was playing in my band. We had just been signed to our management deal in New York, and we had the same managers as the Fuegos. And the Fuegos were touring. We'd played with them a little bit. They were playing in Greensboro, North Carolina at a bar. They were playing 2 sets. And between sets, it's the 5 Fuegos and me, their buddy, just came back to see them and hang out. And then in walks Bruce Springsteen for some reason with Niels Lofgren, his guitar player. And it turned out that Bruce was on tour in Greensboro, playing the Coliseum, probably 2, 3, 4 nights. And he loved the Fuegos. He'd heard their record, and he came to hang out with them. And what Bruce did a lot, if you see the movie or if you know his story, he loves to show up with bands. He'd do it at the Stone Pony in Asbury Park and play a couple encores. So he's like, hey, love your record, guys, da-da-da. What do you think? Maybe we could play a couple encores after your next set. And the Fuegos, they're these kids. They're also extremely stoned all the time. So they're like,
I have not heard about that in the music business. That's a shock.
And so they agree, what are we going to play? Niels is there with his guitar. I think Bruce, I can't remember if Bruce had a guitar or borrowed one, or maybe he just sang, and they decided they were going to play, I think, Hang On Sloopy and Stand By Me, which if you're in a rock and roll band, you know how to play those songs. And then
that's a requirement to get into the rock and roll band.
That is exactly right. Yeah. 1, 4, 5, 1, 4, 5. You know those chords. You can play pretty much anything in rock and roll.
That's right.
And then they just start talking. And this is Bruce in the middle of the tour where he's becoming a superstar. So this is, I guess, the Born in the USA tour.
Okay.
So this is depicting the part pretty much right at the end of the movie, Deliver Me From Nowhere, that Warren wrote this book about the making of Nebraska. And I'm listening to Bruce Springsteen talk, and I liked Bruce a lot. He wasn't my fate. I sound so ungrateful. If it was Jagger, I sound so terrible now. I liked Bruce's first 4 records, and the River was good. I did like Nebraska, but then after that, I just kind of lost, whatever. It got kind of too pop for me, whatever.
We'll have extra security for you as you leave the building tonight. It's okay.
But now he's talking about playing these arena tours, having paparazzi everywhere, and he felt kind of like a prisoner. Right. And he wasn't complaining. He was just it was just a bunch of rock and roll guys sitting around talking, and he was actually being lovely because he's giving these guys kind of advice. Now, he didn't know me from Adam. I just happened to be hanging out with these guys. But I'm listening to him, and we'd either just gotten signed or were about to sign our record deal with Arista Records, which was a big label, not the right label for a little noisy, punky rock and roll band. And I listened to him that night, and over the next 8, 12, maybe 14 months, I just replayed what he was saying over and over and over. And I thought, man, if Bruce Springsteen feels, basically the message I took away was him saying, if I knew that this is what it's really like to get your dream, to be a rock star, then I'm not so sure it was a great idea. That's the message I took. I don't know if that's what Bruce really meant, but there was an element of that. And so I ended up quitting my band while we were making our first record for a major label because of Bruce Springsteen in the back of the bar that night. Yeah. So I'm sure there are millions of people that Bruce Springsteen has inspired to get into rock and roll, but I'm the one that got out because of Bruce Springsteen.
Well, you are telling that story. you show that you were then, and you still are very much so, a good listener. And that is absolutely key, I think, to the work that you've done. There are a lot of people out there writing and broadcasting, and there are a select few that are making us think, making us laugh, and making us really consider what else might be. And you do that on a weekly basis on your show, and you've done them in the books. And we really appreciate you being here tonight.
That's very kind. Thank you so much.
Steven Dubner.